Hello and welcome to another episode of Primetime. In fact, another episode of the Mentor series. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have who I think I can call an old friend, Dr. Sabyn Javeri, who is a very renowned, well published, well acclaimed author, writer, novelist from Pakistan. Her body of work is extremely well known. She's published two novels, the first one being Nobody Killed Her, and the second one being Hijabistan. And she's somebody whom I personally admire a lot for the fearless way in which she writes and the themes that she tackles. And I thought that there's perhaps a few people more fitting than her, especially to explore and talk to young people who are considering getting into writing. So let's welcome Sabyn onto the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Kartik. That's a really generous introduction, and I'm really delighted to be here. Big supporter of this great initiative of yours. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure entirely. So, Sabyn, without further ado, why don't we begin by delving a little bit into your own sort of childhood and growing up years? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Karachi in the 1990s, late 80s. I was a big fan of reading. I read a lot, mainly because there wasn't much else to do, especially during the 80s. It was a time of rapid change in Pakistan, and suddenly, the streets weren't very safe. There wasn't much to do. As a young woman, I couldn't go out much. And all of that culminated in this passion for reading. Unfortunately, we didn't have a big publishing industry. There weren't too many bookstores. And the most unfortunate thing is that there weren't public libraries. So the good thing that came out of it is that I ended up reading a lot of novels which weren't meant for children. So I was reading classics, I was reading philosophy, I was reading, you know, Plato, and God knows what else. So that kind of led to a passion for writing,
Can
mainly
I can
because.
I quickly can I quickly interrupt you? So this is very interesting. I definitely want to ask you who was facilitating your reading habit. I mean, was it either of your parents? I mean, how did you have access to so many books, particularly the ones that you mentioned, such as Plato, that were clearly not that was sort of beyond your years?
Um, no, not my immediate house, because
Mm.
my father was a Gujarati reader and I couldn't read the language. My mother read in Urdu and I used to read Urdu, but I used to find only fiction interesting in Urdu. But I had uncles and aunts and cousins, and this was also a time of rapid immigration. So a lot of our family was immigrating to the U.S. and the U.K. And whenever they would visit, they would leave books behind, or they would get presents. And family members would always get the kind of books they thought were fitting, but couldn't actually be read by a normal teenager. So
Okay.
that's what facilitated the reading interest, being so random. And
Okay,
also, I
that's
think secondhand bookshops, you
right.
know, you wouldn't
That's
really find current novels over there. You'd only find things which, people had had maybe on a course and then they had discarded.
that's very interesting. And so obviously you were an avid reader and you sort of fell in love with the whole process of reading. And at what point did that sort of start reflecting or getting converted into you writing as well? What was when was it first that you wrote something and what was it?
Well, I realized it sounded a bit stupid if I said that I want to be a reader when I grew up. So I thought saying writer sounded a little bit better. But I have to say the next question would be, but what do you want to do?
Yeah.
As if writing wasn't a viable profession, which I think people still, do channel that sort of mindset. I think, to be honest, I didn't really take it seriously as a profession either. I was obviously, my parents wanted me to, like any other, Asian parents, thought that it would be better for me to have a professional degree if I was to pursue my higher studies. I was not really interested in the sciences. I did get into a very prestigious school in Pakistan, in Lahore, the National College of Arts. But when the time came, I realized, and my parents weren't very keen on me going to another city as a young girl. And, there was all sorts of objections and, fears and this and that from the extended
Right.
family. So I ended up
Right.
not going. I then joined an art institute in Karachi. I trained with a very famous artist there. And then I got married early on and I moved to the UK. There, I was not able to pursue my love of art because I didn't have the money to buy canvases and paints and things like that. So that's how I came to write, because paper was cheap and I had access to a computer. So I started writing. Um, I was lucky enough to find a few mentors. There was Amir Hussain, who's a UK Pakistani writer. There was Maniza Shamsi, who is Kamla Shamsi's mother. And they were putting together anthologies which supported new talent. So I happened to publish there. And then there was Ritu Menon of Women Unlimited. She published one of my stories, invited me to India. So I was lucky enough to have a few mentors. Um, I think taking it seriously as a profession came when I managed to get a scholarship into a
Mm,
creative writing master's program at
mm,
Oxford.
mm.
And then I went on to get a School of English fellowship at University of Leicester. So that kind of, gave me that sort of academic support to um, think of writing as a proper discipline. And at that time, it was quite new, the whole idea of creative writing and even critical writing as a field of study. So when I started studying it professionally, I became aware that there are so many journals and publications. And I think that's where the career as a writer really took off, because I realized that, writing, if you're very privileged, yes, writing can be a day job, but you can also teach writing and you can also do your own writing at the same time. So at the moment, I teach writing and I also pursue my own writing.
You've said a lot of interesting things, and a barrage of questions is coming to my mind. I hope I can recollect all of them. First, I want to go back just very quickly a little bit and ask you, in what manner, if at all, did growing up in Pakistan in a relatively conservative, maybe perforce circumstances of not being able to go out very much, and not having much else to do, like you said, except reading. How did that, growing up in that atmosphere or environment, shape you as a person? Yeah.
That's a really interesting question, and please feel free to interrupt me. I realize I ramble on. It's a professorial occupational hazard. But yeah, that's really interesting because, Karthik, I think when you're in that situation, you don't realize. It's only when you're out of it and you're able to reflect back that you realize that, oh my God, I mean, look at people now. I mean, I went on to live in the UK, in the US. I now live in the UAE. And this, being that idea of safety and that idea of freedom and being able to step out as a woman whenever I like, that is what now makes me realize how closeted my uh, and how claustrophobic my life was in Karachi at that time.
Which obviously, if I interpret you correctly, to put it in simplistic terms, means that when you don't know any different or any better, that's your normal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There was, of course, this sense, because I was reading a lot of books where The children's books that I read, like The Famous Five, Nancy Drew, and they were always going out on picnics and walking around the neighborhood. But I think what that did was, instead of kind of inspiring me, it instilled a sense of otherness in me.
Mm-hmm.
It made me realize that I was different and that life was not meant for me.
Mm-hmm.
That there was a big divide. When I moved abroad and when I pursued higher education, um, and when I got published, I think what it made me realize and what I reflect back upon now is that when you don't have access to books that tell your own story, it takes away that kind of self-worth,
Mm-hmm.
that belief. And that's why I feel that we need more writers and we need more readers. And this boils down to the conversation that we were having before the recording, that there is so much hesitation in our current generation of letting our children pursue the creative arts, because we are constantly thinking of their monetary lives or their financial future. But we forget that it's the creative arts which give our younger generation a sense of self-worth, and it's worth investing our children's passion, their lives, into words, into literature, into film, into drama, into theater. Because like you said, how did it make me feel? It made me feel like my story doesn't matter, like
Yeah.
my experiences don't matter, right?
Mm.
If I had access to stories about people like me, who looked like me, or whose lives were as claustrophobic as mine, I would have, possibly grown up differently. Sorry, I'm getting some email notifications, and that's why I don't like being on my laptop. Right? But yeah, I hope that answers
Yeah.
your question.
Do you think there was a conscious or unconscious sort of desire to therefore immigrate as well, to leave Pakistan?
Uh, to be honest, yes, it may sound a little unpatriotic, but yes, and I think a lot of people, young people, not just women, even men, think that the only way is to get away. Sometimes it's because of custom and tradition, sometimes it's because of family expectations. And a lot of us think that the answer is to just leave our environment and immigrate somewhere where there is an openness about your choices, where you aren't judged for the choices that you're making, the life that you're living, where your self-worth is not measured by the kind of car you have, or how much money you make. So yes, it did feel as if freedom would come not just by being financially independent, but by also being socially independent of other people's judgment. um, and that's sad. It's sad that we have to remove ourselves from our environment in order to live freely the kind of life that everyone should be allowed to live.
Hmm. True. I want to change tracks a little bit and also now talk to you. And particularly, again, like I said, I really hope always that a lot of youngsters watch these interviews. You mentioned, and obviously that had a huge impact on you positively, your formal education. At the master's level when you were in the creative writing program. But let me ask you now that you've obviously had some distance since that time. Generally speaking, how important is it to go and study writing to be a writer?
So that's again a really interesting question. So, when we say study writing, it doesn't mean that you will it's like studying any other discipline. It's like studying maths, it's like studying basketball. You're given some tools which will help you assess your own abilities, but it doesn't mean that someone will tell you what to write or when to write or why to write.
Right.
So attending a writing program doesn't mean that you will come out with a great story. It just means that you will come out with tools, um, which will help you tell your story. So I have studied creative and critical writing. So for me, it was really helpful because it gave me confidence in the sense that my story mattered. B, because it gave me a kind of discipline to write, and it took away that idea of the tortured artist and the muse that you have to be in the mood to write. I started approaching it very scientifically that
Hmm.
okay, 1 to 2 is my time to write, and today I'm working on this part of my novel, today I'm working on the conclusion, whatever. So you approach it with a very sort of sense of detachment where
But
you
doesn't that make it rather clinical and sort of rob some of the joy? I don't know. No.
I think again that's very interesting, but I think the joy and the passion should be in the act of writing. What a lot
Hmm.
of people struggle with is, how do I start? I'm scared that, my story is not good enough and blah, blah, blah. So I think it takes away that fear of the blank page, you know. And I think once you're immersed in it, yes, it is joyful, but then it's only the first draft which is joyful, right? After that, it does become like an operation because you're
It
editing,
does.
you're incorporating your editor's notes and
Right.
proofreading, this and that. So,
Right.
and you need to have that patience, and you need to know that this is necessary. You need to. I guess what I'm saying is it helps you put that ego aside,
Hmm.
and I've noticed, for a while I worked as an editor as well, and I've noticed a difference between writers who are trained formally and writers who are writing intuitively. I think the biggest difference for me is that there isn't that sense of self evaluation or self criticism. Writers who are trained, because they get so much feedback and so much constructive criticism, they know how to take criticism, they know how to feedback, they know how to incorporate it. A lot of times writers who are writing without any formal training, their stuff is brilliant, but often it'll lack that consistency of brilliance. And when it comes to taking feedback, there's also that hesitation because they're not used to it, and it's difficult for them to see that this is necessary. So I think that in that sense it gives you that training. And then of course for critical writing, I think it's completely instructional, and you have to be able to know the tools of writing an academic paper or writing a research paper.
Sure. But the thing is, if I can add my two bits here, being somebody who's trained in Hindustani classical vocal, and I suspect it applies to most art forms,
Mhm.
that once you're trained, of course, it gives you these tools that you very rightly mentioned, and they come to your aid in a big, big way. But there's also something very liberating and unabated about not having those rules.
Mhm.
When I listen to somebody who's just a raw talent, who's not trained for a day, there's a certain intangible magic in listening to that voice as well, which is just not, I suppose. Somehow, when there are too many rules, whether it's in writing or anything else, it just sounds very, very rehearsed. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And that's why I think you have to be able to assess your writing yourself. And, just like in yoga or even in singing or even in dance, they say you have to be careful who your guru is. You pick your uh, teacher with some sort of sense of connection, or you respect their work or their judgment. I think it can be very dangerous to just fall into some sort of formulaic kind of writing training, that, oh, this is how you're supposed to write, because that really can damage that raw energy or that creativity that is inside you. I think you yourself are the best judge of what's working in your writing and the story you want to tell. I think when I meant by tools is, I meant, tools as in like how to be able to take feedback,
Yes.
how to be able to, you know, um, know the difference between, for example, some very basic things that writers who are not trained sometimes don't know, that the point of view has to be consistent, or that this is a sort of narrative point of view. And I suppose it also helps if you want to make a career out of it
Yeah.
as a teacher or as an editor. Then you have to know those tools. But if your passion is just writing, then yes, of course, you don't need those kind of that kind of formal training. So again, it really depends on how you're approaching it or what your aspirations are.
That makes complete sense. Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from the very many short stories that you were writing to your first novel. How did that happen? How did the first book come about?
Yeah, so that's where the formal training comes in. um, so unfortunately, short story writers don't have the kind of pull that novelists do in the world of publication. So I was told, oh, this is great, but if you want to really, get published, then you have to do a novel first, and if your novel does well, then you can get a short story collection out. But it's very difficult to sign a first-time author, on a short story collection, unless, of course, you've been published in the New Yorker or something like that. Yeah.
Sure.
So that was sadly, that was the whole reason. And, so I had to put aside that creative energy and, my kind of creative instinct, which
Mm,
was and still is to be a short story writer.
mm,
And that's where the kind of formal training helped. So I then expanded some research that I was doing, because like I said, I was in a critical and creative program, so there was also a critical side to it. And in the critical side, I was interested in women's leadership, especially in the South Asian world. So I thought, let me try and take that research and incorporate the tools of a thriller into telling that story. So I ended up writing a novel which had some very important themes of female empowerment, questions of class and privilege and gender, but was written in a very commercial thriller kind of way. So that's how it all came about.
that's amazing. And what about the second one then? Because that's always from what one hears in so many ways more challenging. The second one.
So the second one was very interesting because by the time by the time Nobody Killed Her was picked up for publication, etc., I had finished my PhD and I was working as an academic. I was teaching critical and creative writing. Um, so I had a novel for my, in academia, you have to publish in order to grow as a
Sure.
scholar. So I had my novel. Now I needed something um, nonfiction or scholarly as well to establish my credibility, as academic. So I was, and also I think because at that time I had moved back to Pakistan after about, I think, 16, 17 years. I had moved back. Um, my, and I realized that in our part of the world, um, storytellers, as we novelists are called, aren't really taken very seriously. And people would keep asking me, the universities I would interview with, oh, where is your scholarship?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of pressure to publish something which was non-fiction. And I again went back to my research on, women's leadership. I wasn't so interested in anymore. I started looking at, empowerment through the hijab. Um, and as I was doing my ethnographic interviews, a very interesting idea started to emerge, and I found that my creative sense was kicking in, and I began to see the hijab as more of a metaphor
Mm.
than than the kind of garment that it
Sure.
is, or a symbol of a religious identity that it is.
Right.
I started thinking of it as a veil between the individual and the world around them.
Right.
And I thought, how interesting would it be to translate that dramatically through fiction.
Right.
So I spoke to some American colleagues, and they were very encouraging, and they said, "Yeah, this kind of work is being done all the time in the U.S. Academy. There is, a lot of cross-disciplinary work being done. Interdisciplinary people are mixing ethnography with fiction." So that gave me kind of courage and encouragement to try something which was quite new for the post-colonial world. Um, I mean, although I think all fiction is based on some sort of truth, but to actually document it, that here are the ethnographic notes, and here is how they have been dramatized. It was something new for the academy, and hopefully that will encourage other people to try such methodologies as well, because I firmly believe, whether it's anthropology or ethnography or fiction, at some point we are all telling stories. None of it is completely impartial. So that's something that I tried to do. And I already had a two-book deal with HarperCollins. So we took that. And then there was some other older, already published work, which was also on the themes of the hijab. And that's how Hijabistan came along.
Okay. What it's this, I mean, there's no other way of asking this except to ask you bluntly: how are you so confident in exploring such controversial themes? Where do you get this courage or fearlessness from?
Um, that's really funny. My gut reaction is that anything that could happen has happened to me. I've probably broken every rule, you know, every code of honor, whatever. So I was like, अब क्या हो सकता है, जो होना है वो हो चुका है. But no, to be really honest, I think maybe because I grew up reading a lot of Urdu literature, and contrary to what we are taught to think of, through media and through pop culture, um, through movies, that, the South Asian woman is very demure and very submissive. If you read women's writing, um, whether it's Amrita Pritam, whether it's, Isma Chugtai, whether it's Kurutulain Haider, um, it's fiery, it's feisty, it is challenging and daring, you know. So, I mean, I grew up reading that, and I really honestly didn't think I was doing something really daring,
Provocative or
yeah, or risky, because, these were my influences.
yeah,
I think the biggest difference was that I was writing in English.
yeah.
And for probably, for the first time, a Pakistani female writer was being read by the, drawing room classes. And, it was something new, because before that, Pakistani writers who were writing in English were writing about, themes which were global, which were of course important, but they were writing about global lives, global themes. But I was writing about the personal, because I had grown up reading writers whose motto was that the personal is the political and the political is personal. So, I was writing about home ground, and also, I was homegrown. I mean, I grew up in Pakistan. I wasn't an expat writing or reflecting about, Pakistan with a very global view. So I
Mm.
think that's why a lot of people found it very provocative and daring. But really, I'm not the first one. I mean, Isma Chugtai wrote Lihaf in what, 1935?
Mm.
Um, Rashid Jahan wrote, her story in Angare much before that. So yeah, I mean, Isma Chugtai was writing about child abuse and female sexuality back then. So
Yeah, but I think you're very self-aware because you put it quite correctly that there was suddenly a whole new audience that had started consuming the literature coming out of Pakistan through you writing in English. So I think it came as a huge surprise to a lot of people. Do you find that the Pakistan that you grew up in and the kind of environment and atmosphere that existed through your childhood, do you think that things have changed a lot, or is it? Do you find more or less the same?
yeah, I think it's one of those two steps forward, one step back kind of thing, or maybe one step forward and two steps back. Um, again, I think when I was there for 3 years and I was teaching at Habib University, I saw the most amazing students, and the new generation gave me so much hope. They were so aware, they were so keen to change things, and, brilliant, brilliant young people. But then again, I mean, you hear things. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of what's happening in Pakistan at the moment. There is so much violence against women, and it's so normalized. And then, I mean, our leadership is, often propagating a, blame the victim culture, which is very reminiscent of, the 1980s, Ziaul
Mm.
Haq's Pakistan.
Mm.
So in that sense, I lose hope. So there's both. There is amazing literature and art and film coming out of Pakistan. Some, I mean, some brilliant art. I don't know if you've seen the cover of Hijabistan. That was done by a young woman. Her work is brilliant. They're amazing musicians, great cinema being produced. But then again, we have, the parallel leadership, governance, clergy, which
Mm.
seem to be sort of not, on that progressive mindset. So I think it's, yeah, like I said, it's, one of those things that it's two steps forward, one step back, or one step forward, two steps back kind of thing going on. But
Okay, I mean you've only sort of confirmed my suspicions. So let's leave that be and let's get into my final couple of questions, which are going to might sound very very silly, but they're primarily geared towards preempting what I think a lot of youngsters would want to ask somebody like you or hear from you. Um, uh, what advice would you have for a young person who is a keen writer and wants to explore doing that um, permanently and professionally for his or her entire career or life?
I would say, go for it. If you if you want, if you have something to say, then say it. Don't hesitate. Um, what I would say is, writing is something that you can do anytime, anywhere. Um, what I wouldn't want to advise people is to put everything on hold, um, and then wait for that, great Indian novel or great Pakistani novel to, descend. And like in Urdu, they say, "Ke nazil hoti hai," that revelation. But I think, if you want to make a career out of writing, it's also good to, maybe also look at teaching writing, or, something that is complementary to writing. So while you are writing your great novel, or while you're, waiting for the editors to get back to you.
Sure.
You also have some sort of a day job, and now it's a proper discipline. It's a fully fledged, recognized discipline all over the world, especially in the Western world. It's one of the most popular fields of study. Even at New York University in Abu Dhabi, where I'm teaching, it's one of the most popular courses. Um, as for critical writing, we have, first year writing courses which are compulsory. Every student has to take it because,
Okay.
they realize that writing is the foundation of studies, whether you are going into a scientific field or the humanities or social sciences. So there are a lot of opportunities to teach writing. There's a lot of opportunities to it can open up publishing opportunities for you. You can work as a publisher, as a editor. You can go into marketing. So yes,
So
definitely.
are you recommending the day job strictly from a financial standpoint?
What I'm saying is that if you want to write, then that's something you can do anytime, right? But if you want to study creative writing, then don't just study creative writing to write a novel.
Right.
You keep your options open, that it can
Mm.
also lead to other paths if you
Okay.
want to
Okay.
do a professional degree.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, how do you figure out if you're any good? And I'm seriously asking this because I get students coming to me all the time whom I'm teaching, short story writing or a little bit of non-fiction writing, and a lot of us, you know, think that we're very good writers, but how do you figure out if you really have a talent or not? I mean, whom you mentioned earlier in the interview, I think that you had great mentors and you got feedback, but isn't it also equally important to figure out whom to get that feedback from?
Yeah, definitely. You should look at mentorship schemes, especially for people from South Asia. There are plenty. I mean, I'm right now on a British Council mentorship scheme, which is called, I think, Words Without Borders. So there are always these kind of projects coming up for young people, especially where you can apply for mentorship. They are competitive. So if if your writing is good enough, if they think there's potential for it to be developed, there's also the international writing program at Iowa University in America, which is especially for Indian and Pakistani writers. So there are lots of opportunities for mentorship. And of course, just sending your stuff out for publication. I mean, nowadays there's so many e-journals, so many print journals,
Yes.
online. There's, just go on to Submittable, um, do your best work, and then send it on for publishing. And, if you get 50 rejections in a row, then you know that you have to do some work and then send it out again. But I think the best way to get feedback is to send it to professionals and to apply for mentorship schemes.
There is, at least in India, what I'm noticing in the past couple of years is a lot of impatience among many students who have begun to write or are flirting also with their first books. And because of that impatience and fear of constant rejection from traditional publishers, a lot of kids are self publishing. How do you weigh in on the whole self-publishing route?
I think there was a time when there was a bit of a stigma with it.
Mhm.
But I think now we live in this kind of instant consumption culture. So I
Uh,
can completely understand the, the desire to, for that kind of instant gratification. And a lot of people are going down the self-publication route.
hmm.
Um, the only thing is that if you go through a traditional publisher, there are phases to the publishing process. So your work will definitely be more polished when it is in print. You would have gotten professional feedback, editing, proofreading. It's a whole, couple of year long process.
Sure.
Um, and when you go down the self publishing route, often it's very rushed.
Yeah.
The quality is not that good, and you don't get that kind of exposure
Right.
That a traditional
And,
publisher
and,
would.
and wouldn't you also say credibility? You simply don't enjoy the kind of credibility that you automatically endow yourself with if you go through a traditional publisher versus self-publishing.
So this is where I slightly differ, because
Okay.
I think for a long time, publishers have also been the gatekeepers.
Mhm.
They have been dictating the audience taste, readers'
Right.
taste, rather than letting readers dictate,
Right.
um, you know, um, their own taste to the publishers. And one really good example of this is the Good Immigrant Anthology.
Mm.
Um, why can't I remember the name of the person who did it? Um, yeah, but anyhow, this is the Good Immigrant Literary Agency, who I'm with as well, actually. And Nirav, I think his name is Nirav. Anyhow, I forget the name of the person who produced it, but he wanted to put together writings by people of color, British people of color, and their experiences of growing up in Britain. And he went to a lot of publishers, and nobody would take it on because they said, "Oh, there simply isn't enough interest." He
Mm.
went on to publish it, self-publish it, and it became one of the best sellers. And I could identify with it. So many people who are immigrants, I mean, he was speaking for so many. So
Right.
I think in that sense, if your story is good enough, if it really is something that resonates with people, if it's not just a sort of self-indulgent need to get your own, oh, I had a
Yeah.
breakup or whatever, I need to tell my story
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
If you're really writing something that has global resonance, then
Yeah.
it doesn't, I think it doesn't need a publisher's stamp for it to have credibility.
Okay, all right. I mean, that's an interesting perspective because another reason why this is happening a lot in India, and I can just quickly share with you, is that a lot of high school students here who are thinking of applying to colleges abroad, particularly in the US,
Mhm.
want to quickly write a book and have it self published just to be able to put that on their applications.
Oh,
Uh, and,
okay.
and I think that's in my view, that's the wrongest reason to do
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, in that sense, then it will show in your work.
yeah.
If you are just doing it as means to an end rather than an end in itself, then that will show in the work that you put forward.
Hmm. Okay. I want to definitely ask you before we wrap this up. Um, what are your views on completely changing tracks? What are your views on what's going on in Afghanistan?
I think I think it's there was this saying that my grandmother used to say, that if a plant is dying and you just prune the leaves, it's not going to fix it. You have to fix the roots. You have to, go down into the soil, get your hands dirty, and that's when the plant is actually, that's when you'll be able to cure the plant's illness.
Mm.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think it's all very symptomatic.
Yeah.
First there is, I mean, I think we have to go really back in history. I don't think we can blame any one person. I don't think we can say, oh, it's the US pulling out too quickly, or it's Biden, or it's Trump,
Right.
or it's
Right.
the Taliban, or it's, I think the whole thing is really tragic. I think
Mm.
it has its roots in political history, in the creation of Taliban, in the invasion of Afghanistan, in, you know, there is it's I don't think there's any one condensed view or answer that anyone can give. I just think it's all very
It's a very
tragic.
complex matter. Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly.
but it's definitely, I think we all have to take responsibility.
Finally, let me end on a slightly more positive note. And is there anything that you can talk about that we can look forward to from the stable of Sabyn Javeri?
Oh, that's very, very kind of you, Karthik. You're inspiring me now. Yes, I have two new short stories coming up. So one is going to be in the Bookends Review, and the other is going to be in Litro, which is a very prestigious UK magazine. It's going to come out in December. Those are on the pandemic, and they deal with the kind of loneliness which I feel is going to be around for a long time, despite the lifting of the lockdowns. So that's something that's coming out. And I'm also working on a book at the moment, a nonfiction book, which looks at, um, well, I won't say too much right now. I'm slightly superstitious. But yeah, some things you can look forward to. So yeah, hopefully.
Okay, well, that's good enough. You've told us, you've teased us. So yeah. Okay, wonderful. It's been absolutely lovely chatting. Lovely to see you after so many years. All the best with your teaching and with your writing. Thank you so much for having taken the time. It's been lovely, lovely chatting.
Thank
And hopefully, I'll see you at some point.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to catch up with you, and it's always lovely to talk to you, no matter after how long. And I wish you the best. And again, I think this is really wonderful what you're doing, and I hope you keep inspiring young people, because I think what you are doing is that grassroots change. You know, you're feeding the roots, and this is what's going to, I think, really bring change and hopefully peace between our two countries. And we might actually meet, because now I'm in the UAE. So look me up in
Yeah,
UAE. All
yeah.
right.
Wonderful. Thank you. I
All right.
thank you
Thank
for
you
the
so much.
compliment and all the best and take care.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye bye.